You know, in nursing, every single thing we do should really be backed by solid evidence. But have you ever wondered where that evidence actually comes from? Well, a lot of the time, it starts with a really practical research tool called non-probability sampling. So in this explainer, we're going to break down what that is exactly and why it's so incredibly important for improving patient care. So, picture this. You're reading a fascinating study about a condition that affects thousands, maybe even tens of thousands of patients. It's a huge topic. But how on earth did the researchers even begin to tackle something that big? I mean, how can they possibly gather data from so many people? Well, the truth is, trying to study everyone is pretty much impossible. It's usually a non-starter. Researchers are in this constant battle with time, with money, and just with simple logistics. Just getting access to the right people at the right time can be a massive hurdle. And that's the fundamental dilemma every single researcher has to solve. So how do they get around it? Well, they use this really clever and totally essential shortcut called sampling. The whole idea is actually pretty simple. Instead of trying to study the entire population, you strategically pick a smaller, more manageable group, a sample that can give you some powerful clues about the whole group. I love this analogy because it makes it so clear. Think about cooking a big pot of rice. You don't taste every single grain to see if it's done, right? Of course not. You just take one little spoonful, a sample, and from that, you can be pretty confident that the entire pot is ready to eat. That's the exact same idea behind research sampling. So, to put a more formal definition on it, sampling is just the process of picking out a subset of people from a much larger group. The goal is to make observations and then draw conclusions about that entire population. It's really the foundational technique that makes all this large-scale research even possible in the real world. Okay, so sampling kind of splits into two main paths. The first one is called probability sampling. This is the scientific ideal, the gold standard, where everybody in the population has a random, equal chance of getting picked. But in the hectic, unpredictable world of a hospital or a clinic, that's almost never possible. And that's why we have non-probability sampling. Here, the selection isn't random. It's the practical, let's get this done approach. And that's exactly what we're going to focus on. All right, let's open up the researcher's toolkit. We're going to start with the two methods you'll probably see the most, convenience and quota sampling. Just think of these as the everyday workhorses of clinical research. Convenience sampling is, well, it's exactly what it sounds like. Researchers study the people who are just the easiest to get a hold of. So imagine surveying patients who just happen to be in the waiting room on a Tuesday afternoon. It's super fast, it's cheap, it's easy, which is why it's so incredibly common. But, and this is a big but, the huge downside is the high potential for bias. I mean, that group in the waiting room might not represent the entire patient population at all, and that can really skew the results. Now, quota sampling is like a step up from convenience sampling. It's an attempt to make things a little better. Instead of just grabbing whoever is around, the researcher first figures out the key subgroups they need to study. For example, they might know that the clinic's population is, say, 60% diabetic and 40% hypertensive. So then they'll go out and find people until they hit those specific numbers, or quotas. This makes sure the sample at least mirrors the population on those key things, which makes it a bit more reliable. Okay, moving on. Let's look at some of the more specialized tools in the kit. These are the methods that are designed for those trickier research situations where convenience or quota sampling just isn't going to work. So purposeless sampling is all about having a specific purpose in mind. The researcher uses their own expert judgment to actually handpick individuals who have the exact experience or knowledge they need for their study. So let's say you wanted to study burnout in the ICU. Well, a researcher would purposefully seek out only nurses who have, say, more than 10 years of critical care experience. Next up, we have something called snowball sampling. Just imagine a snowball rolling downhill, right? It gets bigger and bigger. That's exactly how this works. A researcher finds one or two people who fit the study and then asks them to refer other people they know from their network. The sample size just grows and grows with each referral. This is an amazing technique for reaching those hidden populations that are otherwise really hard to find, like maybe homeless individuals or people who use a specific illicit drug. And finally, there's sequential sampling. This is a super flexible method that you often see in qualitative studies that involve a lot of in-depth interviews. The key here is that the researcher doesn't decide on a sample size beforehand. Nope. Instead, they just keep interviewing people until they hit what's called a saturation point. That's the point where they stop hearing any new information or new themes. It gives you a really deep understanding, but wow, it can be very, very time intensive. So there you have it. We've gone through 5 different techniques, from the quick and dirty to the highly specialized. I think the most important thing to remember here is that there's no single best method. Choosing the right sampling strategy is a huge decision that really depends entirely on the specific goals of the study, the kind of people being looked at, and of course, the practical resources you have. Let's do a super quick recap of the trade-offs. You use convenience for pilot studies and quick data, but you always have to watch out for that bias. You use quota when you absolutely need to make sure you have key subgroups represented. You'll use purposive when you have to handpick experts for a very specific reason. Snowball is your go-to for finding those hidden populations. And finally, you use sequential for deep exploratory research when you're just not sure how many people you'll need to talk to. See, each one has a clear strength and a clear weakness. So, why does any of this matter to you and your day-to-day practice? Well, it's simple. Because when you read a new study, understanding how they got their sample lets you critically judge the quality of that research. It tells you how much faith you can really put in the results. And that kind of critical judgment is at the absolute heart of providing safe, effective, evidence-based care to your patients. So I'm going to leave you with this challenge. The next time you pick up a clinical study, I want you to flip right to the methods section. Find out how they chose their sample. And then ask yourself, okay, based on that choice, how strong are these findings really? What are the hidden limitations here? And how should that change the way I think about my own practice?